For years, the drama on the show was about the wives who was favored, who was hurt, who was leaving. But the family has a second generation now, and that second generation has its own fault lines, its own alliances, its own conflicts. And one of the sharpest of those conflicts is playing out between two of Christine's own children, because Gwendlyn Brown has publicly stood by Meri while openly condemning her own brother Paedon. Sister against brother. And almost nobody is covering it. So tonight, I want to talk about the Brown sibling civil war, because the way the next generation is splitting tells you that the divisions in this family didn't end with the parents. They got inherited. Let me set this up carefully, because we're talking about real adult siblings, and I want to be fair to both. On one side, you have Gwendlyn, who has become the family's most outspoken truth-teller, consistently aligning herself with the wives she sees as wronged, and offering pointed criticism of the family's dysfunction. On the other side, you have Paedon, her brother, who has taken public positions that, in various ways, diverge from Gwendlyn's, including pushing back against some of the prevailing narratives about the family. And somewhere in the middle sits the relationship with Meri, with Gwendlyn standing firmly in Meri's corner while reportedly condemning Paedon. So you have two siblings, raised in the same household by the same mother, landing on opposite sides of how to see this family. That's the Civil War in a nutshell. Now, I want to be clear about what I'm doing and not doing here. I'm going to talk about the publicly visible positions these two have taken, the side of this that they've chosen to make public. I'm not going to pretend to know the private details of their relationship or speculate about things they haven't put out there. Siblings have complicated histories, and most of what passes between them is none of our business. What is fair game is the public disagreement, because they've chosen to express it publicly. And that public disagreement is genuinely revealing about how the next generation is processing the family they grew up in. Here's what fascinates me most about this. Gwendlyn and Paedon are full siblings. Same mother, Christine, same childhood broadly, same front row seat to the same family dynamics, and yet they've arrived at strikingly different conclusions about how to see it all. How does that happen? How do two kids from the same household end up on opposite sides of the family's central conflict? And the answer tells you something profound, which is that there's no single objective truth about what it was like to grow up in this family. Each child experienced it through their own eyes, their own relationships, their own wounds and loyalties. Gwendlyn's truth and Paedon's truth can both be sincere and still be completely different. Same house, different childhoods. Let me talk about Gwendlyn's side of it, because it's the more publicly developed one. Gwendlyn has consistently positioned herself as an advocate for the wives she sees as having been treated unfairly, and her support for Meri fits squarely within that. When Gwendlyn stands by Meri, she's extending the same loyalty she's shown throughout, siding with the family members she believes were wronged and using her voice on their behalf. So her condemnation of Paedon, in this framing, isn't random sibling rivalry. It flows from her larger worldview about the family, a worldview in which some people were wronged and some people, in her view, are on the wrong side of that. When Paedon takes positions that cut against that worldview, Gwendlyn responds the way she responds to anyone she thinks is getting it wrong, directly. Now, let me give Paedon his fair hearing, because he deserves one, and the easy thing would be to flatten him into the villain of this story. Paedon has his own perspective, shaped by his own experiences and his own relationships within the family. The fact that he sees things differently from Gwendlyn doesn't automatically make him wrong. Siblings who lived the same events can genuinely remember and interpret them differently, and a person defending a less popular view isn't necessarily defending a wrong one. Paedon may feel he's offering a needed counterweight to a narrative he finds one-sided. He may have relationships and loyalties that lead him to a different read. Whatever you think of his positions, he has the same right Gwendlyn does to see this family his own way, and say so. But here's what makes this more than just a difference of opinion, and why it rises to the level of a civil war. It's public condemnation. Disagreeing privately is one thing. Publicly aligning against your own sibling, condemning them where the whole world can see, is another. That's a line being crossed, a willingness to let the family's internal fracture become external and visible. And when a sibling is willing to do that, it tells you the disagreement isn't casual. It's deep. It's about fundamental identity-level questions of who was right and who was wrong in the family they both came from. You don't publicly condemn a sibling over a small thing. You do it when you believe something important is at stake. Let me zoom out, because I think this sibling split is actually a mirror of the parent splits. And that's the deepest insight here. The The wives were divided into camps, those who left and those who stayed, those who felt wronged and those who defended the structure. And now, watch what's happening with the kids. They're dividing along similar lines, into those who side with the wronged wives and condemn the dysfunction, and those who take more sympathetic or complicated views of the people the others blame. The fault lines of the parents' generation are reproducing themselves in the children's generation. The family didn't just pass down a name or a lifestyle. It passed down its divisions. The kids inherited the war. And that's a genuinely sobering thought. Because you might hope that the next generation, having seen what the conflict did to their parents, would unite, would refuse to repeat the patterns, and would stand together against the dysfunction that shaped them. And some of the siblings have bonded, certainly. But this Gwendlyn-Paedon split shows that the family's divisions are sticky. They reproduce. The wounds of the parents become the wounds of the children, and the camps of one generation become the camps of the next. That's how family dysfunction perpetuates itself, not through some dramatic curse, but through the simple, sad mechanism of kids inheriting their parents' conflicts and refighting them in their own lives. I want to talk about Christine in this because she's the mother of both of these kids, and it has to be painful. Imagine being Christine, watching two of your children publicly divided against each other, one condemning the other. The family fracture you escaped now playing out among your own kids. There's a particular helplessness in that for a parent. You can't make grown children agree. You can't heal a rift between adults by force. And to see the dysfunction you left behind taking root in the next generation, in your own children, must be one of the harder parts of this whole journey for Christine. She got herself out, but she couldn't fully protect her kids from inheriting the family's divisions, because some inheritances pass down whether you want them to or not. Here's the question I keep coming back to. Can this be healed, or is the Brown sibling generation destined to carry the same divisions their parents did? Because that's really what's at stake. If the kids can find a way to disagree without it becoming permanent estrangement, if they can hold different views of their shared past and still love each other, then they break the cycle. But if the public condemnations harden into lasting rifts, then the next generation just becomes a new version of the last one, divided, suspicious, carrying grudges across the family tree. The Gwendlyn-Paedon split is, in a sense, a test of whether this family can ever stop reproducing its own brokenness. And right now, the answer is genuinely uncertain. I think there's a lesson in this that goes beyond the Browns, which is that the divisions in any troubled family are rarely contained to the people who started them. They ripple outward and downward. The children absorb not just the love, but the conflicts. Not just the values, but the resentments. And as they grow up, they often find themselves reenacting battles they didn't start, taking sides in wars that began before they were old enough to understand them. Watching Gwendlyn and Paedon, I don't just see two siblings disagreeing. I see two people carrying the weight of a family conflict that was handed to them, trying to make sense of it in opposite directions. That's not a story about who's right. It's a story about how hard it is to put down something you were handed before you could choose. So when I step back and look at the Gwendlyn-Paedon Civil War, here's what I see. I see proof that the Brown family's divisions didn't end with the parents. They got inherited. I see two siblings from the same home reaching opposite conclusions about who was wronged, both sincerely, both shaped by their own experiences. I see the public condemnation that turns a private disagreement into a visible fracture. And I see, underneath it all, the quiet tragedy of a generation refighting the war that broke the one before it. Whether they can find their way back to each other, I don't know. But the fact that they're divided at all tells you everything about how deep this family's fault lines really run. They run all the way down. Let me dig into why two siblings from the same home can land so far apart. Because it's not random, and it's not about one of them being smarter or more honest. A huge amount comes down to the specific relationships each child had within the family. In a household this size, with multiple mothers and many kids, every child occupies a slightly different position. They have different bonds with different parents, different alliances with different siblings, different memories of who was kind to them and who wasn't. So Gwendlyn and Paedon, even as full siblings, navigated that enormous family from different vantage points. The father one of them experienced may not be the father the other experienced. The dynamics one of them found wounding, the other may have found tolerable. They're not disagreeing about facts so much as testifying to genuinely different lived experiences of the same household. And I want to say something protective here, because public sentiment in this fandom tends to run strongly in one direction, and that creates a real risk. When a beloved figure like Gwendlyn condemns a sibling, the audience often piles on, turning that sibling into a villain. I'd caution against that. Paedon is a real person with a real perspective, and the fact that his view is less popular doesn't make it less sincere or less valid as his experience. It's easy and satisfying to crown a hero and a villain in any family conflict. It's harder, and fairer, to accept that both siblings might be telling their honest truth, and that the audience dogpiling the less popular one is its own kind of harm. We can side with Gwendolyn's view if we want, but we shouldn't dehumanize Paedon to do it. Social media pours gasoline on all of this, and it's worth naming explicitly. A generation ago, sibling disagreements stayed at the dinner table. Today, they play out on platforms with audiences of thousands, where every comment gets amplified, every position hardens, and reconciliation gets harder, because now there's a public record and a public audience invested in the fight. When you've said something about your sibling in front of thousands of people, walking it back feels like losing face. The platform that lets these kids speak their truth also traps them in their stated positions. I genuinely wonder how much of the rigidity in this rift is the conflict itself, and how much is the difficulty of softening when the whole internet is watching you do it. Public conflict is stickier than private conflict, because pride gets entangled with principle. Think about what this does to the practical fabric of the family. The holidays, the weddings, the ordinary gatherings. When two siblings are publicly divided, every family event becomes a logistical and emotional minefield. Who gets invited? Who shows up? Who has to be kept apart? The other siblings get put in the position of choosing sides or playing peacemaker. The parents grieve the fracture. And the next generation of little ones, the grandchildren, grow up sensing the tension between aunts and uncles without fully understanding it. A public sibling rift doesn't stay between the two people involved. It reshapes the whole family's ability to simply be together. The cost isn't just to Gwendlyn and Paedon, it's to everyone who has to navigate around their conflict. I think it's worth focusing on the fact that Meri is the figure they're split over, because that's revealing in itself. Meri, the wife who was so often on the margins, has become a kind of litmus test for the next generation. To stand with Meri is to take a position about who in this family was wronged and deserves loyalty. So when Gwendlyn stands with Meri and condemns Paedon for, presumably, not standing with her in the same way, the disagreement is really about values, about who you believe and who you protect. That's why it's so heated. It's not a petty squabble, it's a clash over the moral accounting of the entire family, with Meri as the symbol of who got hurt. Fights about values are always the fiercest, because they feel like fights about who you are. But let me offer some genuine hope here, because the picture isn't all bleak. Not every sibling in this family is at war. Many of the Brown kids have, by all appearances, maintained close, loving bonds with each other across the household lines. We've talked before about how the siblings are often closer to each other than to Cody. So the Gwendlyn-Paedon rift, real as it is, exists alongside a lot of genuine sibling solidarity. That matters, because it means the family isn't uniformly fractured. There are bonds holding, and those intact relationships are exactly what could, in time, create the conditions for healing even the broken ones. Siblings who love each other have pulled back from the brink before. The existence of strong bonds elsewhere in the family is a reason not to write this rift off as permanent. And I keep coming back to the idea of two truths, because I think it's the most honest and most compassionate lens for the whole thing. Gwendlyn has her truth about this family, hard-earned, sincerely held, shaped by her experience. Paedon has his, equally shaped by his own path through the same household. The mistake we make, as an audience, is assuming one of them has to be lying for the other to be telling the truth. But that's not how families work. Two people can witness the same events and walk away with opposite, equally genuine conclusions, because they were standing in different places when it happened. The tragedy of the Gwendlyn-Paedon split isn't that one of them is wrong, it's that both of them might be right about their own experiences, and that being right about your own experience isn't always enough to keep you and your sibling on the same side. So if I could say one thing to this audience about the sibling civil war, it would be this. Hold your sympathy for whichever sibling you relate to, but hold it gently. and leave room for the other to be a full human being too. Because the thing this family needs least is more division, and an audience that turns a sibling disagreement into a public execution only deepens the very wounds we claim to want healed. The best thing we can hope for these two isn't that one of them wins. It's that someday, away from the cameras and the comment sections, they find their way back to remembering that they're brother and sister, and that the family that divided them doesn't get to have the final word on whether they stay divided. That would be the real victory. Not Gwendlyn over Paedon, or Paedon over Gwendlyn, but both of them over the cycle that tried to turn them into enemies. And there's one more reason I think this particular rift deserves our care rather than our entertainment, which is that these two grew up with far less stability than most of us did, and they're now navigating adulthood without a map for how to be a family on their own terms. Nobody taught the Brown kids how to disagree healthily, because the household they came from didn't model it. Their parents' disagreements ended in divorces and estrangements and unpaid debts. So when Gwendlyn and Paedon clash, they're improvising, working without the example of grown-ups who knew how to fight fair and still love each other. That makes their missteps more understandable, not less. They're doing the hard work of figuring out, in public and without a blueprint, how to be siblings in the wreckage of a family that never showed them how. I'd extend them both a little grace for that. So I'll turn it over to you, because this one really invites a thoughtful conversation. Do you think Gwendlyn is right to publicly condemn Paedon? Or do you think siblings should keep that kind of conflict out of the public eye? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Do you think the Brown kids' generation is doomed to repeat their parents' divisions? Or can they break the cycle? Tell me where you land, because I genuinely want to know how you read this, and I take care to handle the siblings fairly. If you want me to do a full breakdown of where each of the Brown adult kids stands, who's aligned with whom in the next generation, let me know, and I'll map it out. And if you appreciate that we cover the sibling conflicts without picking a cartoon villain and without invading their privacy, then do me a favor and subscribe, because fairness is the whole point here, and there's so much more of this family's next chapter still unfolding.